All right, good evening everyone, and welcome to Life-Saving Natural Cures and Natural Remedies. Tonight, we're privileged once again to be getting to speak with Dr. Bernie Siegel, and I spoke with Bernie back in February, and it was a terrific interview. Bernie shared some amazing insights into health and wellness, and also some excellent stories there as well. And at the end of the interview, Bernie said he'd like to come back and talk about love and laughter. And yeah, we've actually had so many people emailing us saying when are you going to be doing an interview with Bernie? So it's taken a bit of a while, but we're here again. So Bernie, once again, welcome to Life Saving Natural Cures and Natural Remedies.
Thank you, Troy. This may sound silly, but something I just read. I have a book out, came out a few years ago called 365 Prescriptions for the Soul. And one of the topics is suicide. And
Okay.
you'd say, how does that fit with love and laughter? But I had forgotten some of the things, stories from the past, so to speak. And two, well, I'll add one that isn't in the book, but these are things that really have happened. And it just shows you what a difference it makes when you get somebody laughing and viewing the world differently. Because people have to remember the opposite of love isn't hate and fear, it's indifference, rejection, and abuse. So if you grew up without love, what that does to you when you don't have self-worth, you've grown up criticized. I mean, you become self-destructive because of the hypnotic effect of all that negative chatter. But then what happens if laughter comes in? And so let me tell you three true stories. I always say I make up no stories. These are about people I know. One was a policeman. I was a police surgeon in our town in New Haven, Connecticut. And one day when I'm sitting in the office, the phone rings and they told me there's a policeman on the phone. And I pick it up and his name was Jimmy. And he said, Dr. Siegel, I'm going to commit suicide. And I thought, what am I supposed to say? I got a phone. I'm not with him. Telling him I love you isn't going to change a damn thing. And so what popped out of my mouth was, Jimmy, if you commit suicide, I'll never talk to you again. And I hung up the phone. About 15 minutes later, and he was a former professional football player, in comes in this massive guy crashing through the office, right into my office. And I thought, he's going to throw me out the window. He was so enraged. And he's screaming at me for being such an insensitive, uncaring human being. He said, I got a gun in my mouth. I'm going to blow my brains out. And you say that stupid thing. I said, Jimmy, did you notice something? What? You're not dead. And then he realized I was a wise guy. And it had worked.
Yeah.
And we became best of friends from that day on. And it never occurred to him to ever consider suicide again. The other one was a well-known actor that I got to know when he had problems. And he said that he was going to commit suicide. And his wife went shopping. So he thought, I'll go out to the garage, close it up, start the car, and just sit there and die. What happens when he gets to the garage? He can't start the car. So he has to call a mechanic, AAA, it's called. And the guy showed up and had a sense that something funny was going on here, because of his attitude and his feelings. So he made sure to stay until the wife came home. And then they all talked, and he admitted he was going to commit suicide and then never thought of it again. It just changed his whole attitude, that the car wouldn't start and how nice this mechanic was. And what was the other? Oh, yeah, the other was a fellow years back when AIDS first became known, and there wasn't much you could do for it. He had friends dying of AIDS. He was HIV positive, and he thought, look, I'll just end my life. It's crazy to go on like this. He goes out to the garage, locks it up, starts the car, and sits there. After about half an hour, he said, I realized something. If you have a diesel, you don't die, you just get filthy. So he went back in the house, decided to redecorate his house, clean everything, and went on living. And you see, again, to me, that's the key, that when you decide to choose life, um, that makes all the difference because of the message your body gets.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so people have to remember it's the chemistry that's created by those feelings that affects your life and your health and everything else. Um, my final quote on that page is, um, give your life a charge, start it up, and put your foot on the accelerator. And that's the thing that I began to see, that when people joined our support group for cancer patients and AIDS patients back many years ago, if they changed their life, how they didn't die when they were supposed to. And again, to tell you more stories, again, which I don't make up. You feel ready to die. You're not arguing with the doctor. We're in Connecticut. He moves halfway across the country to Colorado so he could die in the mountains where it's beautiful. I said to the family, call me for the funeral. A year goes by, no phone call. So I'm annoyed with the family for ignoring me. And I call up, and guess who answers the phone?
Yeah.
And he said, it's so beautiful here, I forgot to die. Those are his exact words to me. Another lady said, I was ready, so I went home, bought a dog, put in a backyard wildlife habitat, laughed more, took some vitamins, and I didn't die, and now I'm so busy I'm killing myself. Help, where do I go from here?
Yeah.
And the third was a multimillionaire who was told he had a few months to live, went to work, and told everybody at work, I don't care what you wear anymore when you come to work. He said, it's ridiculous for me to put on a suit and a tie if I got 5 months to live. So wear whatever you want. And I learned that, and I don't wear ties anymore because of him, because he was introducing me one night when I was down to lecture. He lived in Florida. And I said, how come you're not dressed for the lecture? And then he told me his story and how clothing was not an issue for him anymore. But again, what did he do? His wife said, you know, you always wanted a house on the ocean. You can listen to Bernie's tapes and relax. And why don't we do that? So they bought the new house. He changed his attitude towards life. And he lived for over 5.5 years. And it changed the whole attitude of the hospital. You know, they realized they expected him to die, and he didn't. And it was because of what he did. And I always say, when I would see people I thought were dead, this may sound funny, but I worked with a lot of other surgeons, and you know, there are a lot of people in the office who we expected, not that we depressed them or told them when they were going to die, but you know, you didn't expect them to do well. And then they stopped coming back to the office. You assume they've died. And I'd look out at the audience, and there they'd be sitting. And I'd go up to them and I'd say, hey, what are you doing here? And they always had a story about how they changed their life. And I'd say a way for people to think about that is, if you had 15 minutes to live, what would you do? What would you do? You have 15 minutes to live right now. What would you do, Troy?
First thing I would do, I would, well, I'd hug my wife. I'd go and see my kids, and I'd want to be with my family. I'd want to be with them. That's all that matters to me.
All right, and that's what most people answer.
Yeah.
One day, this fella said to me, "Oh, I'd go play golf," and I thought, what kind of a character are you? You're gonna go play golf. What about your family, etc.? And one of our sons was in the group too. And when it came his turn, he said, "I buy a quart of chocolate ice cream and eat it." And I said, "I love it. You know what your thought?" And the guy who said I'd play golf said, "Excuse me, why are you being critical of me? What if golf is my chocolate ice cream?"
Yeah.
And he taught me a lot. And I have to say, I am now more impressed by people who say things like, "I play golf, go fishing," than what you just said. I'd spend all the time with my family. It's
Yeah.
not that what you said is, better or worse than what they're saying, but it impressed me that these people really were in touch with their chocolate ice cream and letting their heart make up their mind, not thinking about how should I spend the last few minutes.
Yeah.
And what a gift that is to your family too. That when your kids know it's okay to do what makes you happy. That was something my mother was always saying whenever I had a decision to make, do what makes you happy. I always thought she was avoiding helping me, but I realized she wasn't. She was teaching me something, to pay attention to my feelings. So I'd say to people, think about what your chocolate ice cream is and go and live it. And you'll be amazed at what it does for your health. Because Monday morning, we have more heart attacks, strokes, suicides, and illnesses. You know, it
Yeah.
ain't Monday. It's how we feel about work and traffic and all the things that we're doing. So don't wait for a disaster. That's what I'm always telling people. Don't wait for a disaster to say, "Oh, I'm going to quit my job. I'm moving. I'm doing this." You know, uh, don't wait. Do it now. Start living your authentic life. Because that also is in a letter to me. A woman who said, "My mother's words were eating away at me and maybe gave me cancer. She dressed me in dark clothes, told me I was a failure, and embarrassed her. And she said, my husband got me your books when I had cancer. You gave me permission to be the authentic person I was meant to be." I said to her, you didn't need my permission. And for people to remember that too. You don't need a disease. You don't need a disaster. You don't need a therapist. You don't need God to tell you that it's okay to live your authentic life. Because if you don't, you've lost your life.
Yeah.
And a lot
Yeah.
of people have. They're letting authority figures tell them what to do, what they want them to be. And so you give up your life to please everybody else. And again, if you have twin sisters, this was a study that was done. If one sister was very sweet, tried to please her parents, internalized her anger, and the other sister was a little devil who drove everybody crazy, the sister more likely to develop breast cancer was the good girl. And if you ask an audience that, say, who's more likely to get cancer, they always vote for the good kid
Yeah.
because of what, again, is going on within you. So I'd say to people, live your authentic life. And the way to get there is to act and behave as if you're the person you want to be. Because I meet so many people who are afraid to try. It's the guilt, shame, and blame they grew up with from religion, school teachers, parents, all their authority figures who were criticizing them. And so they're afraid even to try to get well, as crazy as that may sound, because if I don't get well, then I did it wrong. You know, I mean, I ask people to do a lot of drawings to show what's within their unconscious, like a dream would.
Yeah.
And there are people who say, oh, I'm not an artist, so I can't come to your group. Or I had my 10-year-old son do this because I'm not good at drawing. I'm trying to help you confront cancer and you're afraid to draw a picture. But that's, again, how these people were brought up. And I'd say, stop being afraid. It's not about failing. It's about becoming what I call a respondent, a responsible participant. So don't ever be a good patient, because that's a word that derives from submissive sufferer. And it's not good to be a good patient,
Yeah.
because then, everything happens that the doctor tells you is going to happen. And the mind then, becomes an enormous part of how you react to everything. I know I never stop talking, but one story makes me think of another, because people who thought they were being treated for cancer actually had tumor shrinking and all the side effects that they were told would happen. And due to medical errors in these instances, the people were receiving no treatment at all. The doctors didn't realize it until they did a routine check. In one case, the radiation therapy machine was fixed. And it was a month later that they do, it's like taking your car in for a checkup and change the oil. So they checked the machine and found there was no radioactive material in it a month later. The doctor didn't realize it because he said all the patients acted as if they were being treated.
Yeah.
That included shrinking tumors and, red skin and other side effects. And that's the part that always impresses the hell out of me, how powerful our mind is when it believes something, and that the body then responds. And why I try to get people to visualize the positive side. So there are patients of mine who have said to the radiation therapist, oh, I don't have any side effects because I get out of the way and let it go to my tumor. Or some see it as a gift from God, beautiful purple spiritual beams. And others will see the devil giving me poison and wonder why they're having trouble.
Yeah.
That's why I say the drawings can be so helpful. And besides the drawings, especially with the disease itself, and anything, I mean, you could have migraine headaches, cancer, the flu, but when you have it, think about how you would describe what you're going through to someone else. See, what words would come out of you? Like, I've had problems with vertigo, and my description was, well, the world is spinning around. And immediately made me think about my life and that I needed to slow down and take it easy. Okay? Somebody said pressure when she was about to be admitted to the hospital with severe migraine headaches. And that word fit her marriage. Within 15 minutes, her headache was gone and she was on the way home to straighten out her marriage.
Yeah.
Failure. Okay? This particular person said, oh, my body failed. I said, that is not my question. My question is, how does failure fit your life? Oh, my parents committed suicide when I was a child. I must have been a failure as a child. See, and that's what we all need to look at. But medicine, a sentence that I read that impressed me was, we are trained to treat the result, not the cause.
Yeah.
So an ad in a medical journal read, I was depressed, unable to cope. I went to see my physician. He prescribed an antidepressant. I feel better now. I wrote the medical journal and the pharmaceutical company and said, excuse me, I've had a disaster in my family. I'm depressed. The doctor doesn't even ask me, why are you depressed? What's happening in your life? He just says, here's a pill.
Yeah.
And you put another line in the ad that says, sit down and tell me what's troubling you. They cancel the ad. But to me, that's the sickness of medical training, that too many doctors, and I mean this literally, become doctors not because of people, but for other personality issues that are within them. I happened to become a doctor because I cared about people. And then it became very difficult because I realized they're not teaching me how to take care of people, or myself for that matter. So that was a big part of my struggle. And it was only when a patient of mine said, I need to know how to live between office visits, that I realized that's what I've got to incorporate in my practice, helping people live. But when you ask doctors, future doctors as well as doctors, draw yourself working as a doctor. Think about that. Draw yourself working as a doctor. In one class of medical students, one picture doesn't have a human being in it. That blew my mind. It's all the equipment, from computers to stethoscopes.
Yeah.
The rest of them were the doctor sitting behind a desk with a diploma on the wall, certifying they are a doctor, and no patient in the office with them. And the other extreme, where there was one drawing, was a young man kneeling in front of a patient with his arm around her, handing her a tissue. And to me, you see, that's what being a doctor is. He's helping her. Yeah. He may not cure her disease, but he's giving her a tissue. He's giving her what she needs now. And so he's responding to her. And that needs to be part of medical training, to teach doctors how to respond to people. And then they'd all feel better, because it helped save my life, and the patients became my teachers. And I'd say one more thing, then I'll take a breath, that no matter what profession you're in, learn from your mistakes. Because they always say, if you want to find a good doctor, find someone who is a doctor. You go in and you say, excuse me, I have a question. What is it? First of all, they will listen to the question and not say, I don't have time for questions. You say, are you ever criticized by patients, family, or nurses? And the good doctors say yes. And you'd say, well, why is that? Why are they good? Because they're learning from their mistakes. I always remember in the hospital one day when I was a starting out doctor, saying to one of the nurses, "What am I, one of the worst doctors in the hospital?" She said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Everybody keeps telling me what I'm doing wrong." And she said, "No, you're one of the best. We know you care. So we tell you when there's a better way of doing something because we know you listen and you don't make excuses
Yeah.
and ignore us." And I thought that was very interesting, that I was listening and learning to my patients, to the nurses, and to my family. I always hear our kids saying, "Dad, you're not in the operating room now," when they didn't like how I was behaving,
Yeah.
being, being the surgeon in charge. But you see, it was a way that they could say it without criticizing me. You know what I mean? It wasn't, "You're a terrible father." It was that code message, and then I'd get it, calm down, and we'd work things out.
Yeah.
And that's the part, to keep up that relationship and coach each other. I like the term life coach, that we coach each other just as coaches do. They may criticize you, but it's to improve your performance. And love should be your ultimate weapon. We could talk about that, but I don't know if you had any questions. But
No. I mean, I just love listening to your stories, Bernie. But what you're saying about the doctors, it's so interesting because most of them they don't like to be told anything. Like if you they I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, if you go there and you speak to them, they're very clinical. I find with most of them, not all of them, but yeah, very very clinical. And yeah, I haven't been able to find. Oh, actually, I think there's been one doctor that my wife found, and she was very very good. Like she actually listened, and you could see that she enjoyed her patients and wanted to help them. Yeah, which was
You help
nice, but
people. I learned something from Helen Keller. I mean, one of the things we need to do in medical school, which should really be done, is not just fill out an application, when it says, "Why do you want to be a doctor? Why do you want to go to medical school?" But to really go into it in depth with the students who are in medical school, to say, "Why did you become a doctor?" To look at it.
yeah,
So if they're interested in the human body, in disease, you have to explain people are going to show up. It's not just
exactly.
about disease. It's not just about anatomy. It's people, and to help them to deal with people. And that's why I say it relates to every profession. I meet people who choose their profession to avoid people, but they can't. It
It's
doesn't
very
matter whether
hard.
it's
Yeah,
landscaping or a chef or a plumber. I mean, you have to, you're working for people. So it's, how can I relate to and enjoy people? And when that happens, then you begin to enjoy your work, because it isn't work anymore. Well, another way of putting it that I read one day was, this was from a college professor who said his work was always being interrupted, which upset him, until he realized the interruptions were his work.
yeah,
That helped me a lot. So when things go wrong in my life, and that could be, the furnace doesn't work or the roof leaks or health, that I stop and say, okay, this is what I'm to focus on. Not get upset that it's interrupting my life, but that it is the interruption that I'm to learn from. And Joseph Campbell said it very well. He said, when you're going through hell, ask yourself, what am I to learn from this experience? And I find that enormously helpful. That when I don't like my behavior, I say, stop. What are you to learn from this, from the way you're behaving? And I relate it to what we learn from hunger. You seek nourishment. You don't get mad about being hungry. You go get something to eat. And they'd say the same thing with emotions you may not like or enjoy feeling. But if you turn them into what I call a labor pain, a way of changing yourself and growing, then it acts like the hunger and you have a more nourishing life. And the other is, you mentioned the love and the laughter, that the love to me should be your weapon in life. I tell people to become a love warrior. And what do I mean by that? I mean, when people are driving you crazy, say to them, I love you. Act in a loving way. Then they don't know what to do with you. I mean, I've had some wonderful experiences where I've said to people, I love you, and they look at me like I'm insane. I mean, it could even be if you drive in and take a parking space, see, and somebody else was waiting and wanted it, and then you drove into it, and they're mad as hell at you, screaming, lower your window and say, I love you. And then they don't know what to do with you, and they drive away.
That would be hard. It would be hard to
Yeah.
do, I guess, because
Well,
we're not conditioned to be like that, are we? We're conditioned to yell back
right.
at them and
Yeah,
get
then you
upset
fight
with them.
back. But they're acting that way, and it may add all the headlines we're reading all over the world of the violence and the killing each other is about growing up without love. See, you grow up with rejection. What do you want? Revenge.
Yeah,
So you take it out on everybody else, not just your family or the people who rejected you, but you take it out on the world. You know, whether you walk into a school, into a movie, into a business, and you start killing people, or you blow up, you know, set a bomb and blow up innocent people. That's about revenge. If they grew up with a reverence for life, as Schweitzer taught, then they would never do something like that. Um,
yeah,
you're walking down the street. It's been after the rain, and you see a lot of worms out on the pavement. What do you do?
well, if it was my wife, she would pick them all up and start putting them back in the garden straight
Yeah,
away. Um,
that's exactly, your wife is teaching you a lesson.
she is. She
Correct.
teaches me a lot of lessons, I tell you.
Yeah,
She
Schweitzer,
does.
because
Yeah,
I've been doing that for years, thinking I'm not nuts, you know, I'm overreacting. Until I read Schweitzer saying the same thing. You pick up a worm, put it back on the ground. If you see a leaf, I mean, an insect in a puddle, give it a leaf to climb on.
yeah,
Yeah. If you grow up like that, I know our children would never hurt anybody. You know, they're rescuing creatures. They would never kill any creature out of revenge because it's not in them. Reverence for life is in them. So that's why I say become the love warrior. It's quite a weapon. I have said to people, I want you to know I love you. I'm sorry your parents don't. To a young man who was violent. And our kids were worried he might have a gun and was going to kill me. But I walked over to him and I said, I want you to know I love you. I'm sorry your parents don't. He turned and left, totally changed.
yeah,
My hope is, because a lot of people think, oh, that was cruel. I no, it could have been the most therapeutic thing that ever happened to him. You know, maybe he'll stop and think about, why am I acting like this?
exactly.
You know, and then he can go home and change. Because I know other kids who have told me they're going to commit suicide because of their abuse. When I've said to them, why are you going to commit suicide? I'll get you a gun, go kill your parents. And I mean it, I really say that to them. And he said, no, I don't want to be like them.
Yeah,
Yeah, that impressed me. See, he chose to not be like his parents rather than violent. And I may add, he was going to jump in front of a train, just so people know. Sometimes you do believe in angels. He went down to the subway in New York City to jump in front of a train and end his life. And he called me an hour or so later and said, the train didn't come. I called the suicide prevention hotline and they came and rescued me,
yeah,
and, teaching me about love. Yeah. And you think, what a wonderful accident, you know, but I think when things like that happen, they're not coincidences. When you choose life, when you choose what is life enhancing for yourself and others, then the so-called miracles happen. You know,
yeah.
the coincidences happen. That's when you run into the right people and the right things happen because you're making a choice about life. And I'd say that to everybody. When you have a decision, I place before you life and death, good and evil. Choose life. Don't get selfish. Choose life.
Yeah, and that it's interesting what you're talking about because at the moment I'm reading Conversations with God,
Oh yeah.
book three, Neil by Neil Donald Walsh, and he actually makes reference to you in the beginning. But yeah, just
Oh,
what you're.
let me interrupt you, tell you a coincidence. I was speaking in Baltimore, Maryland. I hear voices, I have conversations with God, and I announced that night, the first time I ever said this publicly, I'm going to write a book called Conversations with God. When I was done speaking, a young woman came out of the audience and said, "My father is writing that book.
Okay.
Please don't write it because people know you better than they know him. So please don't write it." So I said, "Okay, I won't." And he went on to write that book. Now, what I also remember was reading Kabbalah, where it says, sit down quietly in a room, light a candle, quiet your mind, meditate, and the truth will be made known to you. We're all able to hear the voice, but if you don't quiet your mind, it's never going to happen. And let me mention two things that I was thinking about with the voice. One was Helen Keller saying that deafness is darker by far than blindness. And it is true. If
Yeah.
you want to connect with the world, you need to hear. And the other truth is that when you listen to other people, they get to know themselves better, and then you get credit. See, a wonderful therapist knows how to go, mm-hmm, mm. You can go in 25 different ways. And at the end of the hour of therapy, the person says, "Thank you, you've been an enormous help." And all you've said is, because they have heard themselves. I used to test this with our kids. We have 5. When they'd come up and say, "Dad, I got a problem," I'd say, "All right, this is what you need to do." Help. "Dad, I got a problem." "What
Yeah.
is it?" I'd listen to them for 20 minutes. "Thank you, Dad. That was great. Big help." Because now they know what they need to do. I had one lady say to me, after an hour and a half of my being completely silent, except for a few ums and ahms, she said, "That was the greatest conversation I've ever had with anyone." And I hadn't said a single word in an hour and a half. See, she had talked to herself. And so she knew herself. And the other is that this is not going to happen until your mind is quiet. And the symbolism there is the still pond. That the story of the ugly duckling, I don't know if you know it, but the ugly duckling is rejected by his mother, thrown out of the house. But you see, he doesn't go away like that woman I mentioned saying, "My mother's words are eating away at me." He goes off with a quiet mind to start a new life. And one day he's sitting on a pond, sees some beautiful swans, wishes he was a swan, and then when he looks down into the water, he realizes, "I am a swan." But if he was upset about his mother, he's never going to see his own beauty. He's going to see what she made him see. And the other, again, a Joseph Campbell story, was a tiger dies giving birth. And she was chasing some goats. And the goats come over, and this is what I love about animals. They don't say, "Let's get even with her and kill the kid." They say, "Let's raise the kid. Why should he have to suffer and die?" So the goats raise the tiger. And the tiger grows up thinking he's a goat because he can't see himself until another tiger comes along one day. And where does he take him? "Come with me to a still pond." And he says, "Look, you look like me. You're a tiger. You're not a goat." Okay? And how many of us have a quiet mind? And I'm not saying it's easy, but that's why the benefits of meditation, of quiet time, looking at nature, music, all kinds of things that can help us quiet down and not be occupied with all the things, all the interruptions, the things that are going wrong, but to be still and quiet and accept it. One of our sons the other day was flying out to a meeting in California, and he called me and said he got to the airport an hour ahead of time and he still couldn't get on the plane. I said, "Who knows? It could be what I call a spiritual flat tire." I said, "You can be upset, but what if you find out an hour from now that the plane crashed? You're going to be very happy that you didn't make the plane." And that's, you know, how we have to look at life. I
Yeah.
mean, that's why I call them spiritual flat tires. I mean, may get upset that you got a flat tire on the way to the airport, but if it saves your life, that tire gets hung on the living room wall to remind you, you know, that these things can be the best thing that happened to you, not the worst thing that happened. And to live that way. And as I said, keep rehearsing and practicing. When you take actors and you give them a comedy to see the benefits of laughter, um, and you draw their blood while they're acting, then you give the same actors a tragedy to perform and you draw their blood again. While they're performing the comedy, their blood test showed an improvement in immune system function and a decrease in stress hormone levels. While they're performing a tragedy, immune function goes down, stress hormone levels go up. I was very impressed. This was done by a graduate student at one of the colleges, because you think they're just acting. Why should it have that effect? But yes, but they're acting. So their body takes on the role that they're playing. And always think of your life as a performance. The author, what's his name? William Saroyan. I love him and his writing. He said, everybody alive is an actor, but almost everybody alive is a very pathetic actor. And that's why we're given a lifetime to rehearse and practice. And I loved it when a child at the veterinarian said, we have to put your dog to sleep. But do you know why animals have shorter lives than people? And the kid said, yes. And the veterinarian was like, what? You know? And the kid said, yeah, they know about love and forgiveness and kindness. And it doesn't take them as long to learn all those things as it takes people. Yeah.
Nice
So we're
answer,
given
yeah.
a longer life in order to rehearse and practice and learn. And they may say in one study done in one of the Scandinavian countries, they had cancer patients laugh for no reason 4, 5, 6 times a day. And then they had a control group who were told, you know, if something funny happens, laugh. But, you know, you don't laugh for no reason. The survival statistics were improved for those who laugh for no reason. And I mean, and even hope. You know, people were criticizing me, other doctors. You're giving false hope. Hope is not statistical. You know, people win the lottery. Their odds may not be good, but they win. And the same is true with diseases. Not everybody dies who's supposed to die. But this one doctor, they were giving 4 chemotherapy agents that began with the letters E, P, O, and H. And it was called the EPO protocol. And he noticed if we just turn the letters around, it spells hope. So he began giving his patients the HOPE protocol. He said he had 75% of his patients respond positively. The other doctors had closer to 25% of the patients respond positively. So
Yeah.
he's giving exactly the same thing, but it's hope. And I learned on my website, which I haven't mentioned, but Bernie Siegel, Siegel, BernieSiegelMD.com, there's an article called Deceiving People into Health. Because I did a lot of children's surgery, and I learned that the children had faith in me and their parents. So what we told them, they believed. So I have no problem lying to children for their benefit.
Yeah.
Now, what do I mean by that? You take an alcohol sponge and you say to a child, this will numb your skin so you won't feel the needle. A third of them are completely hypnotized and don't feel the needle at all and wonder why other doctors don't do it that way. You know, the others will say things like, I felt it, it hurt, but their reaction is totally different. Okay? And the aspect, other stories are popping into my head, of humor too, and fear. See, if you're laughing, you can't be afraid. Fear is to protect us. I always say, if you're walking through the woods and you see a poisonous snake, you'll get the hell out of there faster than you've ever run, climb a tree, do whatever you need to, you know, to get away. I mean, there are stories about people who've lifted cars off their loved ones. You'd say, how the hell did they manage that? But they were fearful for the life of their loved one.
Yeah.
And so they did these incredible things. But if you live in fear, it's like I described before with the actors. Then immune function goes down, stress hormone levels go up. Your body can't function normally because it's functioning in a way to try to save you from danger. But if you're living in danger, it just tears your body to pieces ultimately. So when patients in the hospital, one story I always share, a woman who was in a panic over surgery she needed. And I tried for an hour to calm her down, talking to her, standing there with her next to her, stretcher she was lying on. And I realized I'm getting nowhere. So I said, we have to go in the operating room now. And I wheeled her in. And she looked around at all the people, the nurses and anesthesiologists and so forth, and said, thank God, all these wonderful people are going to take care of me. I thought, you agree with her, what the hell's going to happen? Nothing. So I said to her, loud enough for everybody to hear, I've worked with these people for years. I know them. They are not wonderful people. And for a minute, I thought she was going to run down the hall and leave. But then everybody in the room burst out laughing.
Yeah.
Because, the staff knows Crazy Siegel and the things he said and did. But as soon as she left, we became family, you see.
Yeah.
I had a lawyer in the office. All these memories are coming back. And lawyers, well, I'll give you a quote from a lawyer. I came to a conclusion that was eminently reasonable, totally logical, and completely wrong. Because while learning to think, I almost forgot how to feel. That's a powerful sentence from him.
Yeah.
In the midst of a crisis, he was busy thinking about, mechanical things rather than the people involved when someone's life was threatened. So I always put it this way, let your heart make up your mind. But, oh yes, a lawyer comes into the office, sits down, and says, why do I have to have surgery? Why do I require surgery? And I thought, I could spend 2 hours talking to him, and all he'll be doing is debating and thinking. So I said to him, I have 5 children, and I have a lot of tuition bills, and I need the money. So that's why I should operate on you. And he burst out laughing. And at that moment, we became 2 people, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
And then he said, okay, now can we talk about why I need that surgery? But he was in a different place then. See,
Yeah.
it wasn't the doctor and the lawyer. It was 2 guys talking about what's the right thing to do. And it worked out fine.
Yeah.
And nobody ever gets mad at you for bringing love and laughter into their life. I may not cure every disease, but if I can help people love and have some laughter, they're thankful for that, because it makes the time that they're here much easier.
Yeah. And you're talking about laughter. Actually, 6 months ago, I wrote an article about the power of laughter for health. And I said at the start, I said, what do Bob Hope, Phyllis Diller, Milton Berle, and George Burns all have in common? I mean, they're all comedians, number one, and number two, they all live well into their 90s. I think Bob Hope lived to be 99.
Yeah.
And an article I read by Bob Hope's daughter, he was saying, because Bob Hope's wife, she lived to be 103, and the daughter was saying that in their house there was always laughter. Always laughter. She remembers sitting around the kitchen table and, Dad would be telling jokes and yeah, there was always laughter. So,
Right. Yeah, my father died laughing, and I mean that literally. Why? First, let me say that dying is not hard when there's love in the family and you don't see yourself as a failure, because you couldn't live forever or cure your disease. I tell people what Mother Teresa taught me. She said, I will not attend an anti-war rally, but if you ever have a peace rally, call me.
Yeah.
So I tell people, work at healing your life. But my father said to my mother, I need to get out of here. And she said to me, "Oh, he doesn't like the bed he's in." I said, "Ma, he's talking about his body. He's tired. He needs." So she gave him permission. And he said, "Okay, I'll die Sunday." So we called up everybody and said, "Grandpa's dying Sunday. If you're going to come visit, you know, get there on Sunday." Sunday morning, I went out to the house and I heard a voice. And I mean this literally. I heard a voice. And I'm standing all alone outside. And the voice said, "How did your parents meet?" And I said, "I don't know." And the voice said, "Ask your mother when you get to the hospital." I get to the hospital, I walk in the door of the room. The first thing I said was not, "Oh, I'm sorry, I love you." Blah, blah. I said, "Mom, how did you two meet?" And my mother started telling stories. The first one was the punchline that she was with girls she didn't know. She was on vacation. And she said that they had a terrible reputation. And coming down the beach were a bunch of boys and they tossed coins. And your father lost and got me. Well, she kept telling stories and he was laughing and looked so healthy. I thought he was going to change his mind and not die. But when see, this is the other fascinating thing about consciousness. He can't know who's coming. Okay? But when the last person who said, "I'll be there," came in the door and we announced her name, he took his last breath and died. Now, he knew. And that's a whole other program we could have on consciousness, because I have an animal intuitive friend, just to share this, who has told me where to find lost animals from halfway around the world. I mean that literally. There are times she's doing workshops in Africa, and she tells me where to find a missing cat in Connecticut. That impressed me. And she said, "The animal's alive. I can see the moon through its eyes." It was amazing. So I've written things in her books to verify her truths. Say, consciousness is not a local phenomenon. And it's part of what, I'm not going to get into it, but the near-death experience, it's the consciousness that continues, that allows people to think and see even when they're not in their body anymore. And as a 4-year-old, I almost choked to death and had that experience. So I grew up, you know, I'm sure very different because I had that experience. And when I was 4 years old, that was not a subject that you talked about or wrote books about. I just thought it happened to everybody, so it was no big deal. And I was quite angry I didn't die, because it was really interesting for a 4-year-old to leave your body and have that kind of experience. And I was very angry. I was glad that I didn't, because it was nicer for my parents. But I thought it'd be a more interesting experience to not go back. But again, the consciousness is the aspect that we need to become more aware of and to utilize it. So whether it's hearing a voice, communicating with the dead. I have a patient of mine who was a mystic. She started bringing me messages from dead patients when she said to me, "Oh, I know you're not a normal doctor, so I have some messages for you." And I refer people to her now when their loved ones die. I say, "Call her up. She'll bring you a message." And also look for messages, look for signs. I always talk about pennies because of what says on the penny: liberty, the freedom to be who you are, faith in God we trust, and Abraham Lincoln, who was assassinated, reminding us of our mortality and to enjoy the day in our life. And I always say, if I find a penny, it's like God saying, "Hey, Bernie, you're on the right path," you know? Well, after my mother died, I found close to 36 pennies in the next few days. The fascinating part was, on the way to the mailbox, you know, walking down my driveway, I don't see anything. On the way back, I saw them. And you tell me how they got there, you know? And I can tell you, there are many parents who tell me stories, feel safe and secure, you know, with other parents whose children have died. And so they're sharing stories, and the symbolism is amazing. A boy who studied butterflies, after he dies, the father went for a walk and had a butterfly follow him all the way home. He met it in the woods. He looked it up in his son's books, and it's a butterfly from South America. What's it doing again in Connecticut?
Yeah.
Or a woman driving on the parkway hears her son's voice, and he has died. Mom, slow down. And a pigeon lands in her lane, and he loved pigeons. And she slows down. As she came around the turn, she said there was a sheet of ice and 20 cars piled up. And it would have happened to me too if I hadn't heard my son's voice. Now, you could say, well, why didn't those other people's family come? But I don't know what goes on in the other people's heads, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that quiet mind, that communication, that relationship with the family, the openness to these things. Because if you want to close your mind and say, that's crazy, I can't believe that. Okay, fine. Goodbye. But if you can calm your mind and keep that consciousness open, then things can happen. I always say, I talk to God a lot, and God said, you're a satellite dish, a remote control, and a television screen. I said, excuse me, what are you talking about? I don't understand your stories and parables. God said, Bernie, there are many channels out there, many sources, many topics, many programs. So I give you a satellite dish to focus, but I also give you a mind. That's your remote control. You choose the channel that you're going to focus on. And your body is the television screen. So now you perform what you're listening to, what you're tuned into. And it's your choice. And for some people, if the choice is about how do I make money, how do I, benefit myself, if they're living in a selfish way, yeah, the results will manifest themselves. And if you're living a Mahatma Gandhi, a Mother Teresa, making different kinds of choices, you'll live a very different life. I think of Nelson Mandela, when he left prison, he said, I understood the importance of forgiveness, that if I didn't forgive the people, I would be in prison for the rest of my life. And so he could let go and, again, forgive. And then he gives himself the freedom.
Yeah.
I always say to people, trying to forget doesn't get you what you want, but forgiving gives you something that you can appreciate in your life.
Yeah. And I was just thinking what you're saying before about when things happen to people, and I guess the overview is, as human beings, we need to trust the process. That trust the process of life. I mean, stop trying to analyze it. Stop seeing things as good and bad. Like you said, the spiritual flat tires. I mean, accept them, but appreciate them, because there is a process. And I think if we trust the process, life is joyful. It's different.
I call life a labor pain, you see, and then it becomes useful. And one woman with cancer compared 9 months of pregnancy to 12 months of chemotherapy and radiation. See, the 9 months, as she said, I watched my body change, tired, I sit staring out at life, but 9 months pass, I give birth to my child, all the discomfort and pain is now justified. The second paragraph was 12 months finally pass, I give birth to myself. All the discomfort and pain is now justified. And I'd say if people see it as a labor pain of self-birth, see, that's why, what am I to learn from this? What is my pain like? What am I experiencing? Then it becomes a teacher. And it also doesn't hurt as much. That I know, because I operated major surgery on people who woke up and said, I don't have any pain, I'm just a little sore. And the nurses thought my patients were nuts, that they were refusing medication. But I said, they're not refusing it, they're not hurting. Because they saw it in such a different way, in a different experience. And it wasn't something imposed upon them. It was something they chose.
Yeah.
And that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, no, it sure does. Um, yeah, I could sit here and listen to you all day, Bernie. Your stories are just, yeah, terrific. But
And,
I'm
well,
just
let me
looking.
tell you this for other people who need to confront doctors, lawyers, or whoever, tell a story.
Yeah,
One author said, there's only one thing truer than the truth, a story. What I found was, you see, if I spoke scientifically to a group full of doctors, we'd get into arguments. That's poorly controlled. That's not a legitimate journal. Um, and we'd get into arguments over the study. But if I told a story about a patient, it didn't threaten anyone. They
yeah,
they would leave saying, well, that was an anecdote. That was just a case history. Yeah, but it changed their view because then they'd notice things with their patients and then they'd come to me and say, hey, I got a story for you now. And see, then the doors opened and a dialogue began.
yeah,
But when you're fighting because of your beliefs, I always say, I live by my experience, not by what I believe or don't believe. If I experience something, it is true. I may not know, it's like Einstein. He had no trouble saying life is a miracle. I mean, because you can't explain everything. So, yes, he saw life as miraculous, and so do I. But there's intelligence, consciousness, love, and energy involved. And all these things can come together and produce amazing things. And one of our books, by the way, is called The Book of Miracles. There's stories, not just about health, but about millions of things that happen in people's lives. But again, when did they happen? When people were involved in life, in love, in faith, in choosing what would help others. Then wonderful things happen, from their cars getting fixed to their lives being saved. It's just amazing and wonderful stories that people sent in. We put them together in a book. It's called A Book of Miracles. But they happened. And when the stories came in and I read them all, I realized it's the way these people are choosing to live that made these things happen. And so I don't literally call it a miracle in that sense. And I may add, because I would think back to my father dying, embarrass your children regularly. Why? So that when you're ready to die, you say to them, hey, what stories do you remember about my life? And then they'll tell you all these things, and you can die with a big smile on your face. And the other benefit is I've had our children come home from work and school and say, thanks, Dad. I said, for what? What did I do? I did something at work today that upset everybody, but the only criticism I got was, well, you know who his father is? So I get blamed for their behavior. And they are so happy because they don't get punished, because their problem is I'm their father. I don't act in a normal way, so what do you expect from them?
yeah. Oh dear.
But I can't stop talking because you see the small things that add up fun and why people get to know you. I go into an Italian restaurant where they have pizza and I ask, is my Chinese food ready? Now the owner knows me, so he knows I'm nuts. But
Yeah.
the staff will say, you're in the wrong restaurant, you did it. And one night, though, when I walked in, I said, is my Chinese food ready? They said, of course. And they pulled out Chinese food and put it on the counter. And the whole restaurant was laughing. See? And the other is, how are you tonight, sir, when you come in to pick up your order? And I'd say, look, I'm depressed. I'm out of my antidepressant. My doctor's on vacation. I can't refill my prescription. Stop asking me how I am. And in this one place, the staff told me, we've been told not to ask you how you are. Because they know what's going to come. And then everybody in the restaurant is looking at me like, oh my God, what's going on? And I'll tell you this, I've had people online offer me their antidepressants. You know what I mean? Open pocketbooks, tell me, come to my locker, I can offer you. Oh, there are a lot of people on antidepressants. So don't forget to laugh, and you raise everybody's level of consciousness, and we all feel better.
No, you sure do. Sure do. It can change the atmosphere of a room too, can't it? You walk in and
Yes.
and someone starts cracking jokes and whatever, and you know, especially if there's a room full of strangers, everyone doesn't know anyone, and you know, people just standing around, but yeah, you start
I say
telling
you
jokes,
become family
laughing.
when there's laughter.
Yeah.
Yeah, love and
So
laughter. That's the family of man.
no, it sure is, Bernie. Well, look, I'd like to just finish up by saying, well, thank you once again, but to all of our listeners, don't forget to check out Bernie's website once again, berniesiegelmd.com, and for any of Bernie's books, CDs, DVDs, wisdomoftheages.biz is where you go for those. Um, I think that's run by your son and daughter-in-law.
Right.
Great little shop, so you can get any of Bernie's books from there. And yeah, thanks again, Bernie.
My pleasure, Troy.
It's always a pleasure listening to you. It's so
You're a
good.
good listener. Thank you.
But no,
And I may add, it's harder for the men. We're seeing more men now come to the support groups because of feelings. If I have a minute, because when you say to husbands, "Why did you come with your wife?" I'm her chauffeur. They
yeah,
drove them.
I got
Now
dragged along.
they're willing to say they're there because of their feelings about their wife, not just "I'm her chauffeur," a mechanical response. So it takes a lot more time than I wish it did, but we're slowly seeing both the health professions and the males, population begin to get in touch with feelings and not just thinking.
Which is good. I mean, but like you said, that's just quickly. That's the way we've been brought up. That's the way I was brought
Right.
up. My dad never showed emotions, never showed feelings. I
Yeah.
never saw him cry, never. And so that was the way I was brought up. So
Yep.
I had
Be
to
brave.
learn to get in touch with my feelings because I was never taught it. I was never shown it.
Well,
So
in the office, I've had men say, "There's no point in living. I can't work anymore." It blew my mind. And their wife and children are sitting next to them.
yeah,
See, on the other hand, the women say, "I can't die till you're all married and out of the house." Um, but I try to get them to understand, don't die when the kids leave home. You have a life too. And that's what we all need to realize. We each have a life.
yeah,
It's not just about doing, it's about a human being.
yeah, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again, Bernie. It's been absolutely fantastic. So you take care of yourself, and thanks again for changing the time to 8 o'clock. So, well, it's 9 o'clock your time now, but
Right.
yeah, no, that's great, Bernie. All right, take care of yourself, and thank you once
Thank you.
again. All
I'd
right,
say
good.
to everybody, try to live the sermon.
That's it.
Thank you, Troy.
Thank you, Bernie.